How's it going, everybody? In this video, I'm going to show you a budget Azorius control deck. It's around 60 bucks. You could definitely cut a few cards to make it even cheaper. The commander of choice is the Grand Arbiter. It's going to make all of our white spells cost 1 less to cast and blue spells 1 less to cast. However, if it is a dual color, it will be 2 less to cast. And it makes our opponent pay 1 generic more to cast all of their spells. This deck looks to tax our opponent for doing anything. This is usually in the form of making them pay extra mana. We also run cards that limit our opponent's actions, and we back it up with cheap counter and removal spells. This deck looks to win the game through attrition. However, on the upper end of our mana curve, we run some pretty powerful creatures that are also really hard to deal with. These first 3 cards make it so whenever our opponent does something, they have to pay 1 generic more. If we have the elephant on the field, our opponent's going to have to sacrifice a permanent every time they play a spell, or they have to pay 1 mana. Thought is going to make everybody's non-creature spells cost 1 more generic to cast. And if we have Call-a-Fee on the field, she's going to make it so if our opponent wants to target a creature or enchantment, they're going to have to pay 1 extra mana. Each of these 3 cards are going to make it so our opponent has to pay extra mana if they want to attack us. Ghostly Prison is more expensive because it's the best option here. For 3 mana, you can play this enchantment, and each creature that your opponent wants to attack with, they have to pay 2 mana for that creature. Similar effect to the other 2 cards, so you can definitely drop this if you want to save some money. Fate Spinner is a little expensive, but the card's so sweet. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, that player chooses draw step, main phase, or combat phase. Then that player skips each instance of the chosen step. So when this card's out on the field, your opponent is losing a lot from their turn. The Arbiter and Mind Sensor are going to make it so your opponent can't really search their library. They still can, but it's just going to add a little tax. Suppression Field makes it so activated abilities cost 2 more generic. Frozen Ether makes all artifacts, creatures, and lands that our opponent controls come into play tapped. And Aura of Silence helps us deal with artifacts and enchantments by making them more expensive to cast for our opponent, and we can sacrifice it to destroy something. We're adding these 3 cheap planeswalkers. Azorius has a lot of great planeswalkers, how they are expensive, but these are some cheap options. Dovin weakens one of our opponent's creatures. It makes it so they can't activate abilities. For the -1, we gain some life and draw a card. And if we get its ultimate off, it makes it so our opponent can't untap more than 2 permanents during their untap step. Dovin Hand of Control is actually a really good planeswalker. For only 3 mana, it makes it so all of our opponent's artifacts, instances, and sorceries cost 1 more to cast. And his -1 kind of helps prevent some damage. Narset helps us search the top of our deck for a card as long as it's a non-creature or non-land, and it prevents our opponent from drawing more than 1 card each turn. These are 3 of our pretty heavy hitters. The Supreme Judge has flying and a 6th power. Whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker we control, we get to draw a card. The Lawbringer has flying and 6th power as well. However, whenever this enters the battlefield, each opponent can't cast instances or sorcery spells that player's next turn, and it has an activated ability where we can kind of Sphinx's Revelation every single turn. Whenever the Arcane attacks, we can detain up to 2 non-land permanents. Detaining makes it until our next turn that those permanents can't attack or block, and their activated abilities cannot be activated. Angelic Arbiter is a little expensive on the mana curve with 7. However, when this is on the field, each opponent who casts a spell this turn cannot attack with creatures, or each opponent who attacked with a creature this turn can't cast spells. Kind of really prevents our opponent's decision making. This next card gives us an alternative win con. At the beginning of your upkeep, we're going to put a counter on this, and if it has 5 or more counters on it, we just win the game. However, whenever a source deals damage to you, we're going to have to remove a counter from this card. So if we somehow get through 5 upkeeps without our opponent doing anything, we just flat out win the game. Some other large creatures we have are the Arcanist, the Omnipotent. We could tap this and draw 3 cards, and we could also spend 4 mana and bounce it back to our hand to save it. Stormtide Leviathan's an 8 mana 8/8 with Island Walk. It all lands or islands in addition to other types, and creatures without flying or island walk can't attack. Moving on to some counter spells. Cancel and Dissipate are some nice 3 mana options. Dispel is pretty limiting, however for 1 mana it can counter any instant spell. Counter spell is the best 2 mana option, and Negate hits all non-creature spells. Render Silent counters a spell and then also makes it so our opponent can't cast any other spells that turn. Rewind gives us a counter spell and also a nice tempo swing. Path to Exile, Condemn, and Swords to Plowshares are awesome 1 mana options for white. These are some really great cheap options to deal with creatures. Terminus is going to put all creatures in the bottom of their owner's library. Could also be casted for the miracle cost of 1. Cleansing Nova is going to deal with all creatures or all artifacts and enchantments, and Aetherize is going to bounce stuff back to your opponent's hand. Imprison of the Moon deals with any creature, land, or planeswalker and converts it into basically something that's useless. When Reflector Mage enters the battlefield, we could bounce something back to our opponent's hand. And Fiend Hunter, when it enters the battlefield, we can exile another target creature. Banishing Light, Detention Sphere, and Oblivion Ring are all quite similar. You can exile non-land permanent as long as this card remains on the field. These 2 cards help us deal with artifacts or enchantments. Brainstorm, Opt, and Factor Fiction is going to help us dig for the cards that we need to see. Mid to late game, Pull from Tomorrow and Sphinx's Revelation are be great ways of drawing us cards that we need to find. Righteous Authority is going to allow us to buff a creature, but more importantly, it's going to allow us to draw a lot of additional cards. Curse of Exhaustion can be casted on our opponent, and that player can't cast more than 1 spell each turn. This owl is going to make it so white spells cost 1 less to cast for us. And Wolf Denial is kind of a dumb blocker. It has Defender, Flying, Shroud, and has 8 toughness, so for only 3 mana, it's kind of a really annoying problem for our opponent. Gideon's Lawkeeper is a nice cheap card to get out early in the game to tap creatures. Azorius Guildmage can also tap creatures at a little bit more expensive costs, but it can also counter activated abilities. Hannah can help us return artifacts or enchantments from our graveyard to our back to our hand. And the Reggae makes it so people can't cheat out cards, and also prevents people from casting spells for free. This first card buffs all of our other blue and white creatures, and a 3 Marshal Coup in there to get us a lot of extra soldier tokens. Could be pretty handy if you need some extra blockers or you need to go wide to attack over some things. Swiftfoot Boots is going to give something hexproof and haste. Every upkeep, Tamio's Journal is going to generate us a clue artifact. Then if we tap this card and sack 3 clues, we can search our library for a card and put that into our hand. Since this deck likes to stall and play a longer game, being able to generate artifacts and allow us to search for cards that we need is quite fitting. Commands here in Arcane Signet help us filter mana. Both the Signet and the Locket are again some more mana filtering options. Blinkmoth Well can tap non-creature artifacts. Castle Ardenval can make us 1/1 tokens. Halimar Depths can help filter what card we're going to draw next. Celestial Colonnade now is super cheap. This is very exciting. For 5 mana, you can make it be a 4/4 flying and vigilance creature. These 3 cards are all dual lands. Then we add 2 more dual lands here. These next 3 cards you just run in every single commander deck. And we're running 11 plains and 12 islands. This deck definitely looks to play a longer grindier game, almost putting your opponent into a lock. The one thing this deck probably lacks is the ability to finish a game quickly if needed. I think adding an infinite combo or some more powerful creatures can help assist that. Anyway though, let me know down below what cards you think should have been added to this deck. If you're looking to play Magic the Gathering on a budget, check out some other videos on the channel. I'll see you in the next one.